I'm Flavia Zimmerman for the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Dr. David Mickler. Dr. David Mickler, he is a lecturer at the University of Western Australia, and Dr. David holds several positions, such as coordinator of the University of Western Australia Africa Research Cluster, co-chair of Worldwide University Network Global Africa Group, and co-editor of the Australasian Review of African Studies. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. David.
Thanks a lot.
In your opinion, which are the main challenges faced by the African Union today?
I think the African Union is facing a couple of baskets of challenges. One would be a basket of capacity. It's still a relatively young organisation, around 15 years old, and has been developing its institutional and human capacities in that time. But it hasn't reached the kind of levels of staffing and of financing that it requires, and therefore it's not able to perform all of the quite ambitious objectives that it sets out. The other basket of challenges are around the legitimacy of the organisation, and this is something that the project that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks in South Africa is looking at. And that really gets to the heart of what is the purpose of the organisation, and who are the key stakeholders in that organisation, and how do those stakeholders perceive the legitimacy of the organisation. Mm-hmm. And I think the African Union has quite a lot of legitimacy amongst the member states, which comprise the organisation, but it still is struggling to develop full legitimacy in the eyes of a range of other stakeholders, particularly in civil society across the continent.
Do you think the issue of corruption in Africa does have an impact of some issues regarding legitimacy of the African Union?
Yeah, I think so. Perhaps not so much within the African Union itself, in the Secretariat, but perhaps through national governments and the extent to which the African Union is trapped by the interests of particular governments, and those governments might have fairly narrow self or national interests that preclude the organisation from really performing the wider roles that it needs to play. Mm-hmm. And certainly this is where civil society groups, for example, would be very keen to try to hold some of those leaders to account for issues like corruption, but also to use the principles of the African Union to root out corruption within some of the member governments.
Mm. Thank you very much, Dr. David. And in regards to failing and failed states in Africa, to which extent does it impact development in the region and security matters as well?
Yeah, I think we have to look at the history of African states to understand why they face some ongoing challenges. They were largely created through the colonial period, European colonial period in Africa. And for that reason they were born as a product of colonial interests, and particularly the borders that they inherited from the colonial states. They didn't necessarily reflect the way in which people living in those states would have liked to have set up their own countries. And then we've had a period of independent rule, where we've seen a number of governments turn towards dictatorship or run countries that are not in the best interests of populations. And then we've had a whole range of other factors on top of that: the Cold War, interventions by external powers, prescriptions of the World Bank and the IMF, which have really undermined a number of state functions in Africa. And as a result of that, a number of governments are not able to maintain stability and security within their borders. They face challenges from different groups in society, or they face challenges from groups, transnational groups operating across large parts of their territory. So it's a huge challenge, not only for the states in Africa, but also for continental organisations like the African Union to try to manage those issues.
Well, thank you very much. Now, my final question would be on regards to AlShabaab and Boko Haram. In your opinion, which strategies the African Union could apply to mitigate the current threats presented by AlShabaab and Boko Haram in the region?
I think there's two elements. One is the transnational element, so firstly trying to restrict the influence of outside actors or outside ideas which are having some impact within both Nigeria and Somalia in these two cases. But secondly is really to support the governments in those two countries to develop institutions in society that can find ways to give society alternatives to political violence as a means of either providing a livelihood or providing some kind of political outlet. So really supporting governments to create strong state institutions to counter the kind of ideas and threats posed by those non-state groups.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. David. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And this is all for today. Thank you very much for being with us.